Hi everyone. We're kind of going to go through take 2 on this assignment. So sorry the clear picture didn't quite work out for me, but we will just keep charging ahead. So I'm going to first go through a few different garden spaces that I pulled out of magazines, just so you can get an idea of what types of spaces you should be working with. Obviously there's a wide variety, but you kind of want to be looking at like maybe a garden room or garden space. If it gets too big, it gets a bit cumbersome. If it's too large of a space, if it gets too small, that isn't going to give you enough information either. So again, this is a really contemporary design. What we're going to be doing in this assignment is pulling the different design principles out of the design so we can help us with our analysis of the design. So you can see in this one, there's a lot of forms in this. You have these very irregular, strong kind of forms in here. The little chair almost has a rectangular or triangular space, some circular planters. We've got some texture in this, this image with some of the different plant material being very fine and medium. There's not a lot for line. There's not a lot for color. There's not a lot for density in this design. So very contemporary. Here's a little more of an organic space. You can see there's a little bit of color in the cushions and the foliage in front. You can see a lot of variety in the different textures of the plants in there. Some irregular paving, rectangular bench, little round pots and path lights. This is a more architectural kind of composition. So for those of you who are interested in architecture, that is fine to have something that has a strong architecture in it. It should just have some planting. This one, you can see these very bold rectangular forms in this entryway feature, and then the red wall beyond, a lot of texture in the plant material and form in the plant material and color in that red wall. This is again another little bit more contemporary organic, I would call this. So lots of texture in the plant material and back. There's quite a bit of color in this space and some strong forms in this space. And then I chose a more kind of a generic garden picture that hopefully will encompass a number of different things to pull out. So that's what I'll be starting with on this assignment. So I've kind of got my picture taped down to a board. Let's get this camera a little bit higher, get a full view of it. And you can see mine was a split page spread, so I just taped it together. And I'm going to get some pitch overlay, some pitch tape out to do some overlay. And as I'm getting my pitch ready, one of the things that you might notice is that this particular, when we're talking about texture tonight, we really don't have a wide variety of textures in this composition. We really have these kind of medium texture with the trees and the fine texture in the lawn. That also carries through into some of the materials for hardscape and furnishings. I've got a very fine decomposed granite on the ground plane, and then the planks on the table and the steps for more of a medium texture. I don't really have that coarse texture in this composition. The other thing we'll be focusing on tonight is some forms. So I see a lot of rectangular forms in this. I see a lot of round forms in this. And that's kind of, pretty strong geometry in this particular composition. Some of those others I showed you didn't really have that. I'm going to take my piece of pitch paper and I can just have a rough edge at the moment, and then clean it up with scissors down the road. I like to leave a little bit around the edge just so I can record what pens that I use. I almost create a little preliminary legend for my work. I'm going to go ahead and tape it down over the top of this paper on the edge of my tape. And it's okay if it's a bit big and long. Again, you can trim it up, and sometimes it's good to write notes on the outlying edges, and then you can trim it up and make it real clean and neat for the final production that you're going to use in your assignment. Okay, so I've got my Tish taped over the top, and I'm going to use my 3 different pen weights. I don't know where my last one rolled off to. I'm going to use 2, oh there it is, 3 different pen weights. So I have my 3 different pen weights. I'm only going to use 2 of these because I don't, as we talked about, I don't really have a coarse texture. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify my medium textures, and I'm just going to kind of do a rough outline of those areas. I'm just kind of, those tree canopies were a nice medium texture. There's also these trees back in here. I'm just doing a rough circle. I'm going to do this kind of fast because I don't want to spend all night on this one. Like I spent half the night. You guys are doing this at home. I would do it a little bit more slowly. I do have some fine textures in some of this plant material, but not a whole lot of it. Mostly it's in the lawn. So I'm going to call most of this as a medium texture in the planting here. And the furnishings to me have a medium kind of feel to the texture. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of just circle those. And again, I'm just doing a rough pass. You might want to take a little bit more time, but again, it's already late tonight. I do feel like there's a chair at the front that has a very kind of fine fabric on it, so it's more of a like a canvas, so it reads more as a fine texture. This, I'm going to say that, you know, this background and these hedges also have a pretty medium texture. I'm just going to kind of lump all that together here. And I'm using my medium pen weight. This has a fine texture, or medium texture here. So I'm just going to give this a striped pattern. I'm going to do this kind of quickly. You guys, again, might want to take more time at home to do this a little bit more neatly. But what I'm really doing is creating a pattern to illustrate where my medium texture falls. And I'm doing this kind of vertical medium weight pattern for this area. And I'm going to do this kind of quickly because otherwise it will take way too long. But you guys do it a little bit slower for your final version. Okay, I think I've pretty much picked out all of my medium texture. Again, I don't have a coarse texture. So what's, oh, I missed the planking on these steps. To me is also a bit of a medium texture. I'm going to go ahead and move down through those. And then the remainder, this decomposed granite, the lawn, and probably even this house is going to be more of a fine texture to me. Again, I don't have the 3 categories. I'm missing the coarse texture. And maybe I'm going to make these kind of an opposite way. If I'm using a thinner pen weight and maybe leaving a little bit more space in that. If I had a coarse texture, I'd probably use my really heavy pen weight and again change the width of the area between the lines, kind of almost code it and make it like easy to read, almost like a key. Okay, so there's kind of my 2 categories. Now I'm also going to create a legend over in here. And I'm going to say, here's my medium. This is fine texture. If I had coarse, I would maybe do even my thicker pen weight, maybe at an angle, so that I'm starting to divide up the drawing and identify what each of those textures is. Okay, so that's kind of how to do the texture overlay. Again, I didn't have a lot of variety, but if I did, and some of you will, it can be a little bit challenging. So here's a site that has a bit more texture. And so the way that I might tackle this is I really want to get the plant material and the hardscape material into those 3 categories of fine, medium, and coarse. But of course, I have a lot more variation in texture here. So the way that I might start this is I might look for the coarsest area, the plants that have the biggest, heaviest visual weight to the leaves. And back in here, there's some really big leaves. So I'm going to say that's coarse to start with. And then if I'm looking at plant material, fine plant material is like these grasses that I can see throughout the design, right? Kind of sprinkled throughout here. I'm going to say that's my fine texture. So my medium texture is going to fall in the middle. So if I look around this design, I might say, okay, here's kind of medium texture over in here. That's what my medium. So this is a little bit heavier than my medium that I've identified. So is it closer to this or is it closer to this? I'm going to say that this plant right here is closer to the medium texture. This plant is not as coarse as back in here, but it is more coarse to me than this. So I'm going to say this is closer to this coarse texture. So I'd probably rank that as a coarse texture. Maybe even this big strappy plant here. I mean, it's a lot more coarse than my fine, even though it's a similar form. It could go either medium or coarse, and that is going to vary eye to eye. You know, our brain interprets these things on its own. So it's up to you to fit it into those three categories, whatever your plant material and your paving material looks like. You know, my pavers are very fine, very smooth. When we start getting into the bench, that's a little bit more of a medium to me. The tree bark could be either fine or medium. So you're going to try and rank these things as in one category or the other, if you have a lot of variety. I didn't happen to have a lot of variety in mine. Okay, so that is how you're going to create the texture overlay. And then we will talk about the form overlay. Let me take another piece of paper. Move it down quickly. And so when I look at my design, I see some forms. I see some round, kind of topiary shaped shrubs. I see these canopies of trees as being very round. I see this sheared hedge in the back as being very rectangular form. The pattern of the paving, even from this angle, are strong rectangles. Tables are rectangles through the furnishings. There's some round little terracotta ball there and some planters. So I'm going to start pulling those forms out of my garden space in my next overlay. And so with mine, I really have two types of forms. Some of you guys might have more. You could have triangular forms or cones and triangles. You could have very irregular forms. You could have some very organic forms, but you're going to look at, it's like, where's Waldo for forms in your overlay? Okay. So I'm going to start with the circular form, and they're marching through the landscape in these tree canopies. I also had that little terracotta sphere. It's partially hidden by shrubs, but that's okay. I can just finish it off. This is kind of a roundish shrub here. There's another one right here. Again, I'm only seeing part of it, but that's okay. I can interpret what the remainder of that is. There's one back over in here. Okay. A round shape in the landscape. I've got a planter right there that's round. I actually have these ovoid shaped shrubs in the back, so I'm going to call those ovals. They kind of march down this way. And what you start to see is how the designer has used forms in the landscape and the repetition of forms and patterns and texture. And it starts to break apart these compositions. So I'm just going to pick a pencil color, it could be any color, and I'm going to color all my circles and ovals, just one basic so it stands out. In this case, it's yellow. And that shows up okay on the screen. Again, I'm doing this kind of quickly because I don't want this to be a huge, long, drawn-out video because it's the second one I've done tonight. So we're going to clip right along. And I'm sure you don't want to have to watch a long, drawn-out video, but I would say, you know, spend a little bit more time, be a little bit neater than I am as you're doing these because this is going to be turned in. You're going to show the rest of your classmates. So there's my, I would say, circular and oval shapes in this composition. And then I've got all these kind of rectangular shapes. And again, some of them, I know they're rectangles. I have to interpret a little bit of that because it's cut off in the picture frame. But I can certainly do that. All right. I would say this little piece of walkway is like a square. And I have this kind of rectangle that comes across. I'm looking at it in perspective, so it's a bit skewed, but my brain recognizes that that is a rectangle. There's a rectangular walkway. I've got these tables that are rectangular. Rectangle. I must feel like this, you know, I'm going to leave those alone. I've got a rectangular table here. I'm going to interpret behind it, and then I've got a rectangular planter on that table. A bunch of rectangles on rectangles. I could call the chairs squares and rectangles if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that this time. This is very rectangular, this kind of love seat here. So I'm going to make that a rectangle. Show the edge of it. Anything else? Oh, there's a square planter right here. Right there, it's a cube. Oh, the hedge in the back is very sheared as a big long rectangle. It's kind of tilted on a plane. That is definitely a rectangle. Got some little round shrubs in here too in the front. They have a very tight form. This is almost an oval shape here. So I got a few more, found a few more rounded ovals. So I've got my rounded ovals, and now I'm going to just take another color. In this case, I'm going to use something bright so that you guys can see it. But if I were turning this in, I'd probably find a nice color family I liked a bit more than those bright primary colors. But it definitely helps you see it, I hope, on the video. Again, I'm just color coding these squares and rectangles to help this overlay help the viewer identify where I have analyzed that these shapes are found. Okay. Oh, we got this one more right here. Hardly any pencil lead left. Okay, so there are my shapes. Again, I'm going to create a legend. It's going to be just kind of a rough legend at first. So leave yourself some room on each side. So we'll say form. Okay. And I'm going to say, do something like this. right. So my little legend to remind me what I've got in my plan. Again, if you had a more organic type of space you've selected, I mean, I would call this kind of an irregular form, these kind of green wall pieces. Obviously, there's a circle there, a little kind of triangular, almost shaped chair there, some circular planters up top here. See those some circular planters up there. This is a very organic shape. So we've got some little squares and rectangles on the bench and the pillows. There's a little circular pathway and a kind of a round planter. And then almost these irregular pavers are kind of a strong form in the composition. This has quite a bit of form. Here's a square rectangle cabinet, these round chairs, little round planter pots all over. You know, there's kind of this rectangular backdrop here. So some geometry. There's even some geometry in the patterns on the table if you wanted to get down into that with some triangles. Here's obviously lots of rectangles in this one. I would say that these palms become columnar, and so do these little Joshua tree or Dracaenas, I think they are. They're very much like columns in the landscape. So forms come about in these different shapes. So take a look at forms in your overlay. Okay, so that is the first two overlays. And then next on Thursday, we'll work on the remaining three. All right, good night, everyone.